Neil Ozwaker. The team of robbers burst into the bank, guns drawn and masks on. Neil Ozwaker was in the lead, his mind already racing ahead of the others, calculating the best way to get what they came for and get out without getting caught. The security guards were quickly dispatched, and the team went to work filling their bags with as much cash as they could carry. Neil kept one eye on the door, ready to give the signal to make their escape when he heard sirens in the distance. He turned to his team and nodded, and they all ran for the door. They sprinted down the street, bullets flying after them. But Neil's mind was already ahead of them, planning their next move. He knew they could lose the police if they ducked into an alleyway and climbed up onto the rooftops. His team followed his lead blindly, trusting him to get them out of this mess alive. And he did not disappoint them. He led them expertly through the city streets, losing their pursuers time and again before finally making their escape with a haul that would keep them all comfortable for a long time to come. The team of robbers waited outside the safe house, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had never seen Neil Ozwaker move so fast or be so decisive. He had always been a great leader, but this was something else entirely. They heard sirens in the distance, and knew that the police were getting closer. But Neil was already inside the safe house, and he would not leave them behind. Finally, he emerged from the safe house and signaled for them to come inside. They sprinted up the steps and into the relative safety of the building. Neil Ozwaker had once again saved them from certain capture or worse. Neil Ozwaker arrived at the safe house and immediately got to work setting up his trap. He knew his team would be hot on his heels, so he had to be quick. He rigged a tripwire at the door that would release a cloud of sleeping gas into the room as soon as they entered. Then he hid in a closet, waiting for them to arrive. Sure enough, within minutes his team came bursting into the room. The trap was sprung and they were all instantly asleep. Neil emerged from his hiding spot and began gathering up the money bags. He knew he didn't have much time, so he quickly stuffed as much cash as he could into his own bag. Then he made his escape, leaving his team behind to dream of what could have been. The casino bar was a loud, raucous place. It was full of people celebrating their wins or trying to forget their losses. Neil Ozwaker walked in and immediately felt at home. He made his way to the bar and ordered a round of drinks for everyone in the place. Then he started to measure up the people around him, looking for potential threats or allies. He saw a group of women laughing and joking together. He could tell by the way they carried themselves that they were born with powers. He would have to be careful around them. But he also saw potential in them. They were obviously strong and confident, and that could be useful to him.
Hey, bartender.
Neil Ozwaker called out.
Can you tell me anything about those women over there?
The bartender leaned in and lowered his voice.
They're trouble, that's for sure. They are all born with powers, and they use them to get what they want. You'd be wise to stay away from them.
Neil nodded and took a sip of his drink. He would have to be careful around these women. But he also knew that they could be useful allies if he played his cards right.
Hey, ladies.
Neil Ozwaker said as he approached their table.
I couldn't help but notice that you're all born with powers. I'm looking for some people to help me with a mission, and I think you would be perfect for the job.
The women looked at him skeptically, but he could tell that they were intrigued. What kind of mission? One of them asked.
I can't tell you too much right now,
Neil replied.
But I can promise you that it will be dangerous and there's a lot of money to be made. So, what are your names?
Neil Ozwaker asked. I'm Sarah, one of the women replied. And this is Emily, and Alex.
It's nice to meet you,
Neil said.
I can tell that you're all very powerful.
Sarah looked at her friends and then back at Neil. We'll do it, she said. But first, you have to prove that you're worthy of our help. She stood up and walked towards him, her eyes glowing with power.
You have the power to control friction,
Neil said. Sarah was taken aback. How could he know that? She decided to test him and used her power to make the floor incredibly slippery. But Neil was already moving, dodging out of the way as if he knew exactly what she was going to do.
That's very impressive,
he said.
but it's not enough to convince me.
Sarah used her power to make the floor slick and then slid towards Neil with a super fast punch. But he was already moving, and he easily blocked her attack. Then he countered with his own punch, sending her flying across the room. She hit the wall hard and crumpled to the ground.
That was a mistake.
Neil said.
You should have just taken my offer.
The other two women were impressed by Neil's display of power and decided to join him. They knew that he was someone to be reckoned with and they wanted to be on his side.
Welcome to the team,
Neil said.
I'm glad you're both on board.
He could tell that he had just gained two powerful allies. And he knew that they would be useful in the days to come. Neil Ozwaker took the ladies to a secret facility under the casino bar and removed his rubber mask. They were both taken aback by his real face.
Okay, so we'll start with the basics of hand-to-hand combat and self-defense,
Neil said as he warmed up.
This will give you the confidence and skills you need to defend yourself in close-quarters combat situations.
Alex and Emily nodded eagerly, already feeling more empowered just by being there.
Then I'll teach you how to use a variety of weapons.
Neil continued.
Each has its own strengths and weaknesses, so it's important to know how to use all of them effectively.
Alex was particularly interested in this part, her eyes lighting up at the mention of knives and swords.
After that, we'll work on your agility and stealth.
Neil went on.
This will help you move quickly and quietly, making it harder for your enemies to track you down.
Emily was nodding vigorously now, eager to put her new skills to the test.
And finally, I'll teach you how to read people and anticipate their movements.
Neil concluded.
This will help you stay one step ahead of your opponents in any situation.
Alex and Emily exchanged excited looks. They knew they were going to be learning some invaluable skills today. As Neil began to train Emily and Alex in the use of their powers, it quickly became clear that they were both natural prodigies. Emily was able to pick up on new techniques almost immediately, while Alex showed a staggering aptitude for understanding the nuances of her abilities. In no time at all, the two of them had mastered the basics of using their powers effectively. Neil pushed them harder and harder, testing their limits as they progressed through an intense training regime. They learned how to control their powers more precisely, how to focus them for maximum effect, and how to use them in combat situations. Every day brought new challenges and new lessons, but Emily and Alex rose to meet each one with determination and courage. Eventually, after months of hard work, Neil declared that they were ready. Emily and Alex had become skilled warriors. Now it was time for them to put their skills to the test against some real opponents.
I've got a surprise for you,
Neil said, leading them towards the garage.
These are your new cars.
He opened the door to reveal two gleaming Aston Martins, parked side by side. Emily and Alex stared at them in disbelief. They had never seen anything so beautiful.
Now go out there and show me what you can do,
Neil said, handing them the keys.
I want to see those powers of yours in action.
Emily and Alex climbed into their cars and revved the engines, eager to put their skills to the test. They raced out of the garage and onto the streets, and towards a mansion owned by Don Sicilian, the most notorious gang leader in the city. The orders were to kill the Don before dawn. Emily and Alex parked their cars a few blocks away from the target mansion and walked the rest of the way, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. They had scouted the area earlier and knew that there were guards posted at all of the entrances, so they would have to be careful. They crept up to the house and peered in through a window. Inside, they could see Don Sicilian sitting at a desk, surrounded by bodyguards. It was going to be a tough fight, but Emily and Alex were ready for it. They turned to each other and nodded, then they burst through the window and attacked. The first henchman was taken down with a blast of fire from Alex, who incinerated him where he stood. The second went flying backwards into a wall, courtesy of a well-aimed telekinetic blast from Emily. And the third was knocked unconscious by a deftly thrown knife from Alex. Within seconds, the three henchmen were defeated, but there were more guards on the way. Emily and Alex knew they had to act fast if they wanted to take down Don Sicilian. Just as Emily and Alex were about to make their move, 2 more henchmen arrived on the scene. These 2 were different from the others, though. They each had unique powers that they used to defend their boss. One of them was able to create force fields, which protected Don Sicilian from all of Emily's attacks. The other could control electricity, and he used his power to shock Alex and knock her unconscious. Don Sicilian grabbed Alex's unconscious body and looked into her mind. He saw all of her memories, all of her secrets, and he knew that he could use them to control her. He placed his hand on her forehead and concentrated, pushing his will into her mind. She was now under his control. She would do whatever he asked of her. He turned to Emily, who was still trying to fight through the force field, and smiled.
Now let's see what you can do,
he said.
Kill your friend.
Emily knew she had to act fast. If she didn't, Alex would be lost forever. She gathered all of her strength and focused it into one huge telekinetic blast. The force field around Don Sicilian shattered, and Emily was able to knock him unconscious with a well-aimed punch. She turned to the henchman who could control electricity and used her telekinesis to rip the power source out of his body. He collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Finally, she turned on the remaining henchman and used her powers to crush his throat. He gasped for air but couldn't breathe. Soon he too was dead. Emily stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by bodies, but she didn't care. All that mattered was that Alex was safe. Emily and Alex finished their mission and returned to their boss. He looks at them with a satisfied smile and nods his head in approval.
Good work, you two. I'm proud of you. Your next mission,
Neil tells them,
is to steal back the Philosopher's Stone from a government facility.
He looks at them sternly.
This is very important, so I need you to be extra careful. They have taken it from me and it is a very valuable piece of property. The government is currently using it for research. We need to get it back before they figure out how to use it properly.
So,
Alex says,
our next mission is to steal back the Philosopher's Stone from a government facility.
Emily nods.
Yep. That's what Neil said.
She pauses for a moment before continuing.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this one. It sounds dangerous.
Alex nods in agreement.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But we've done dangerous things before and we always come out okay.
Remember,
Neil tells them,
the great reward for completing this mission. And I know you can do it.
He looks at them sternly.
I have faith in you.
Alex and Emily nod their heads and accept the mission. As Neil dispatched Alex and Emily to retrieve the Philosopher's Stone, he knew that they were up for the challenge. He had seen them both in training and knew that they had what it takes to succeed. He watched as they disappeared into the night, heading towards Area 57 where the stone was being held. He knew that they would be met with opposition, but he also knew that they were more than capable of handling whatever came their way. He could only hope that everything went according to plan and that his 2 prodigies returned safely with the stone in hand. Only time would tell. The night was dark and moonless, the perfect conditions for what Emily and Alex had to do. They had been monitoring the security patrols for days and knew exactly when and where to make their move. The moment arrived when the guard they were watching went to lunch. Emily and Alex made their move, quickly and quietly cutting through the fence at a spot where they were confident they would not be seen or heard. They made their way quickly and quietly to one of the buildings on the base, staying clear of any security cameras or guards. When they reached the door, they paused for a moment, preparing themselves for what was to come. Suddenly, the door opened and a guard walked out. He stopped when he saw Emily and Alex standing there, their faces covered in shadows.
Who are you?
He asked, his hand going to his gun.
We're here for the Philosopher's Stone,
Emily said, her voice cold and hard.
and we're not leaving without it.
I'm afraid that's not going to happen.
The guard said, his hand tightening on his gun.
You'll have to go through me first.
We don't want to hurt you.
Alex said, her voice pleading.
Just let us go and we'll leave you unharmed.
I can't do that.
The guard said, shaking his head.
My orders are to stop anyone who tries to enter this building. My name is James,
the guard said.
and I'm not going to let you past me.
Emily and Alex knew that they couldn't let this guard stop them. They had to get past him, no matter what. Alex summoned her fire powers, engulfing the guard in flames. At the same time, Emily used her telekinesis to lift him off his feet and slam him into the wall. The force of the impact was enough to kill him instantly. Suddenly, the guard rose to his feet, his eyes glowing red. Emily turned to see the guard coming towards her, his mouth open in a snarl. She tried to use her telekinesis to stop him, but it was no use. The guard reached her and sunk his teeth into her arm. Emily screamed as she felt the burning pain of the bite. She knew that she had been infected with whatever this creature was carrying. There was no turning back now. Alex reacted quickly, grabbing the guard and incinerating him with her fire powers. As the guard turned to dust, a device inside his body triggered an alarm. Emily and Alex knew that they didn't have much time now. They had to find the Philosopher's Stone and get out of there before the whole base was alerted to their presence. As they made their way deeper into the facility, they felt a strong aura emanating from a direction. They knew that this had to be where the Philosopher's Stone was being held. Emily suddenly stopped, her body going rigid. Alex turned to see that her eyes had turned red and she was snarling like the guard did before he attacked her.
Emily, what's wrong?
She asked, but there was no response. Emily just stood there, staring at her with hunger in her eyes. Alex knew that she had been infected with whatever this creature was carrying. There was no turning back now. Alex hugged Emily tightly as she began to turn into a zombie. She knew that there was no turning back now and she had to do what was necessary to protect herself. She unleashed all her heat at once, incinerating Emily in an instant. As she walked away, she felt tears streaming down her face. She had just killed her best friend. Alex with all her emotion went towards the emanating aura. She knew that this was where she would find the Philosopher's Stone. Sure enough, she found it in a glass box, surrounded by guards. She didn't hesitate for a moment, using her fire powers to incinerate them all. Alex grabbed the Philosopher's Stone and flew towards the roof of the building with her fire powers. She knew that she had to get out of there before more guards arrived. She burst through the roof, flying into the night sky with the stone in hand. She had done it. The Philosopher's Stone was hers. Alex arrived back at the facility with the Philosopher's Stone in hand. Neil was there to meet her, and she could see the relief in his eyes.
You did it.
He said, hugging her tightly.
I'm sorry about Emily.
She's gone,
Alex said, her voice breaking.
but we have the stone.
Neil took the stone from her and looked at it for a moment.
This is going to change everything.
He said softly.
With this, we can finally end this war.
Alex felt the aura leave her body and she fell to her knees in weakness.
I'm sorry,
He said, his voice breaking.
but this is for the greater good.
She knew that Neil was using the Philosopher's Stone to take away her powers.
No.
Alex shouted, but it was too late. Her powers were gone and she was just a normal human again. And so Neil took the Philosopher's Stone, tossed a bag of money at her and walked away, leaving Alex behind. She could only watch as Neil Ozwaker disappeared into the night, taking her powers with him.